Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Ana Principi, and I'm the Undersecretary of Institutional Relations and International Cooperation at the National University of La Plata. I would like to welcome you all to this, the fourth cycle of conferences we are holding as part of this new joint project between the USA and Argentina, shared dialogues on gender, ethnicity, geopolitics, history, and memory. The project is one of the beneficiaries of the U.S. Embassy in Argentina's grant program for cooperation and exchange project. The University of La Plata is extremely grateful to the Embassy for choosing and sponsoring this series of conferences. I particularly like to thank the cultural assistant of the U.S. Embassy in Argentina, Dr. Michael McLean, and the specialist Nori Cerda and Giselle Dubinsky for all their support and hard work during the preparation process. I would also like to thank Professor Graciela Baum, Professor Fernando Rigone, and Ignacio Angelani for all their hard work too. And of course, I would like to thank Walter Mignolo, but I'll do it in the end as well. At these events, 22 professors from the USA and Argentina have discussed and will discuss and call into question the connections, intersections between concepts such as ethnicity, class, feminism, testimonial literature, translation, decolonial turn and language teaching, geopolitics, history, and memory. This ambitious project is about situated experiences, but experiences that are also liable to be compared, contrasted, and which nurture one another. A project fostering exchanges, fostering critical thinking, self-reflection, and debate, and thus fostering transformation, the opportunity for rethinking education, politics, society, ourselves, our classes, from perspectives that are intersectional, comparative, interdisciplinary, situated, and translational. At today's session, we'll hear from Dr. Walter Mignolo, but before that, Professor Graciela Baum will introduce him. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Good evening, everyone. I am delighted, grateful, and honored to present Walter Mignolo here with us. Okay, Walter Mignolo is William Wanamaker Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Global Studies and the Humanities at Duke University. He is Associated Researcher at Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar, Quito, between 2002 and 2020, and an Honorary Research Associate for CISA, Center for Indian Studies in South Africa, Wits University at Johannesburg, 2014-2020. He's a Senior Advisor at DOC, Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute, based in Berlin, and received a Doctor Honoris Causa degree from the National University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Among his books related to this topic are The Dark Side of the Renaissance, Literacy, Territoriality, and Colonization from 1995, with Chinese and Spanish translation from 2015. Delinking the Rhetoric of Modernity, The Logic of Coloniality, and the Grammar of Decoloniality from 2007, translated into German, French, Swedish, Romanian, and Spanish. Local Histories, Global Designs, Coloniality, Subaltern Knowledges, and Border Thinking from 2000, translated into Spanish, Portuguese, and Korean. The Idea of Latin America from 2006, translated into Spanish, Korean, and Italian. On Decoloniality, Concepts, Analysis Praxis, co-authored with Catherine Walsh from 2018. Decolonial Politics, Border Dwelling, Reexistence, Epistemic Disobedience, Duke Press, 2018. Okay, this presentation now over. We have Walter Mignolo here with us, so we are glad to announce him and welcome him here.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the organizer, Ana and Fernando and Graciela, for the introduction. It's very strange to talk to an audience that you cannot see except the the three people, the four people I see in the screen. I have been thinking about this dialogue because I don't have anything to say about decolonizing the English curriculum in Argentina because I am not teaching here. So I will kind of revert the process and invite you also to think about what would that be to decolonize the curriculum, not of Argentina, but of Latin America. Because in U.S. university, just in a few universities will be a seminar or a course on Argentinian culture, literature, history. So in the curriculum is Latin American studies. And Latin American studies will depend on who is teaching. Maybe Argentina, maybe Colombia, maybe Mexico, Brazil, the Caribbean, etc. So I will, at some point, I will use the example of one seminar, undergraduate seminar, that I have been teaching for about 15, 20 years. But before that, I would like to make some comments, introductory comment, about the concepts that have been attached to this dialogue of U.S.-Argentina, the shared dialogue, which is ethnicity, history, memory, geopolitics. And what interests us in this series of conferences, I think, more than anything else, is the geopolitics of language. So it was a very interesting question that was asked to Graciela in the previous conference or lecture, which is, if I remember correctly, English is imperial language, how you teach or decolonize English. But English languages mean English culture, English history, everything that is related to the language. Well, we don't have this problem in the United States. To ask how do you decolonize Spanish will be an odd question because Spanish is, on the one hand, the language of the third world, and on the other hand, is the language of the Latinos, Chicanas, Latinx. But in that case, it's very interesting because Latinx, they are, in general, bilingual. But in any case, because of the coloniality of language, if we talk about the coloniality of language, we have to remember that what is coloniality of language? How does it work? How do we recognize it? That there is a coloniality of language that we would like to decolonize. Because otherwise we just kind of decolonize English or Spanish, etc., without knowing how, what is or how it works or how was constituted. The coloniality of language will be a shot in the dark. So I will start from there. I will start from the colonial difference that articulates the modern colonial languages since the Renaissance. The Renaissance, when they talk about the Renaissance, there are two moments. One moment is, or period. One period is from 1350 to 1500, according to the periodization of the experts. And at that moment, the Renaissance was mainly, the main language of the Renaissance, the powerful language of the when we talk about the Renaissance, we don't think about Spain. We don't think about England. We don't think about France. The modern, but the Renaissance is Italy. Why? Because Italy was very rich, right? Italy was the richest country of what today we consider Europe. It was not as rich as India and Persia and China by any means, but was very rich in that provincial sector of the planet that was inhabited Western Christian and then became Europe. So, and then comes the second period of the Renaissance, that is 1500, 1650, mid of 17th century. Now the languages there are Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. Why? Well, because Spain and Portuguese are leading the way of the kind of colonial expansion of Christianity. Not only they kind of came to what became America, and they control from Argentina, or what is today Argentina, Chile, up to what is today Colorado and California, and of course Texas, and of course Miami. All that was Mexican territory. So Spain was a very powerful state, and Spanish was a very powerful language. Portuguese less. Why? Because the Portuguese were not interested in converting people. They were more interested in commerce. But the Spanish were were the kind of the missionary to convert people all over the world to Christianity. And Spanish was a language of conversion here in China, etc. No? And Italy remained as a very powerful language because Florence and Venice and Genova were very powerful center of commerce and of finances. If you go today to Venice and Florence, you will understand what the wealth of that moment meant. Well, the thing is that by the 18th century, the wealth began to move north. Why did the wealth began to move north? Well, because basically since 1600, the Dutch East Indies Company and the British East Indies Company were kind of amassing a lot of richness from Indonesia, from India, and also from the Caribbean. All the Caribbean plantation, and also France had a lot of plantation in the Caribbean. The Spanish and the Portuguese were mainly gold and silver. But the riches now move into plantation economy, and Europe began to become very rich. And that richness, the material richness, kind of got into the languages. If you think about the Enlightenment, what are the languages of the Enlightenment? It's not longer Spanish and Italian and Portuguese. It's French, German, and English. And at that time, the European Enlightenment, the French and the German and the British, invented the south of Europe. And the south of Europe were the lesser European. And still it is in the European Union, right? The south of Europe is not the heart of Europe. So you see how the kind of the geopolitics of languages began to be articulated into what we call modernity, coloniality. Modernity is the celebration of the progress and advance and all that. And coloniality is who suffer then. So in the kind of geopolitics of language, there are two levels. One is that the European language of the South become lesser language of Europe, the South of Europe. But even so, the rest of languages in the world, Arabic and Urdu and Bambara and Russian and Mandarin, very powerful languages with a tremendous culture, but they kind of disappear from the imagination of the North Atlantic. So French and English and German began to take over. On the one, the countries began to take over the economy, and the institution, the university, the culture, we can say, began to be articulated in those languages. If you think today, or in the past 20 years, 30 years, what do you translate from Latin America to English? Literature, culture. What do you translate from English to Argentina or Spanish? Science, technology, and all the kind of the serious stuff. And at that moment, we began to realize that if Spanish became a second-class language in Europe, Latin American Spanish and Portuguese became even lesser. It became the language of the third world. There is an anecdote. Borges was such a tremendous thinker and fine perceptor of details that when Americo Castro was here, he then, after that, wrote a short piece called Las Alarmas del Doctor Americo Castro. So Americo Castro was alarmed because the kind of language we speak in Buenos Aires is not the language of the Spanish Academy. So there are two sides of that. One is that the Spanish of Latin America is seen as lesser by the Spaniard, but Borges is proud of his Spanish. And he said, well, come on, don't come here to tell me the way I had to speak. But the point here is, this is an anecdote I kind of jump over. The question is that I was saying that the science and technology and philosophy and culture in general, up to 1945, is controlled by French, German, and English, but British English. In 1945, things changed tremendously. Why? Because Europe, even the north of Europe, the heart of Europe, because of the war, is no longer as rich. So United States take over the economy, take over the social sciences, take over the sciences, and take over the language. So American English began to overcome the influence of British English. So yes, English is an imperial language, and Spanish is an imperial language, right? But Borges responded to that. But if you read Lamming, George Lamming, a Caribbean writer, a tremendous Caribbean writer, he said, well, the English that we speak in the British Caribbean, in the English Caribbean, is our English. We don't have nothing to do. We just took it and reinvented it. So I think it's something very similar, we may say, that is happening with Spanish among the Chicano Latino population, but certainly it happened in Latin America, especially what we call la literatura del boom, when these kind of writers began to just write in the way they felt, like Lamin, this is our Spanish. So there you have a kind of map of the geopolitics of language. The main consideration in this dialogue, Argentina-United States, or Latin American-United States, is that Latin American Spanish is a Spanish of the third world. And English is the language of the first world, be England or be United States. Now, this what I'm saying is not just a question of the politics of languages, a kind of the differential power between languages. And now that I say differential of power, I can tell you what do we mean when we talk about the colonial difference and the imperial differences. So the difference between, let's say, French or English, the Enlightenment, and Spanish and Portuguese is an imperial intramural difference because they're all European. But the difference between French and English and German and the Spanish of Latin America is a colonial difference, because there was no empire here, or the empire that were here spoke Nahuatl and spoke Quechua and spoke Aymara, but they kind of vanished from the European modern geopolitics of language. But I am saying all that because everything I said is related to ethnicity, to history, to memory, and even in some cases to gender. And this is the problem we have in Spanish, we don't have in English. We don't mark the gender, right? So languages is not just a grammar. Fanon said it very clearly. To master a language, said Fanon, doesn't mean to master a phonetic, a syntax, and a semantic. To master a language means to carry the weight of a civilization. And in the weight of a civilization is the memory, is the history, is the ethnicity, because ethnicity is not the question of blood or skin. That is when races converted ethnicity into race. But ethnicity, ethnos, come from Greek ethnos, was translated into Latin natio. And natio became nation. And nation became the community of belief, or community of blood, I mean, the national, etc., etc. So, but community of blood, a natio is also memory. That memory is history. And that memory and history, language is fundamental. It's not all, because the memory is transmitted through the memory of the bodies, and we even don't notice, but we grow into community, and we have a kind of genetic transmission of the memories to the body. And the memory is also sounds, and is visual, and is memories, and is food, and is everything that kind of compound that entity that we call ethnicity, ethnos, nation. So I think that when we talk about curriculum and decolonizing the curriculum, We have to think about that. We have to think about that because everything that I analyzed, everything I said at this point, was a decolonial analysis of coloniality of culture. I didn't present it at the beginning like that, but I couldn't say this, what I said up to this point, if I don't think decolonially. But to think decolonially, I have to think in terms of how coloniality organized the power differential. Now, this is a kind of tricky question that I will devote a few minutes to unpack. First of all, coloniality is already a decolonial question, a decolonial concept. It's not a sociological concept. It's not a historical concept. It's not a concept that emerged in Europe. For Europe or the United States, or the Anglo-United States, it's difficult to see coloniality, to perceive coloniality, to sense coloniality. But the Native American and the immigrant, when you mention coloniality and you explain a little bit what it is, they understand what is happening to them. And that is what happened to me. I didn't learn coloniality as a kind of rational exercise. I learned coloniality because coloniality is, now I understand a lot of things that I couldn't understand. So coloniality is a powerful decolonial concept. But I was saying that everything, all the stories I told you about the language, about the geopolitics of language, I told you, is a decolonial analysis of the coloniality of language. Now, that is what I would like to unpack, because I think it's very important for the curriculum. I would say that it's crucial for the curriculum. I mean, the curriculum, not the specific curriculum. It's crucial for education. It's crucial for pedagogy. Why? Because what we call modernity in its 6 modern imperial languages, but also in the principle of knowledge that has been articulated in these languages, schooled us and made us confuse the explanation with what we explain, the interpretation with what we interpret, the description with whatever we describe, the representation, and here is the key word, the representation with what we represent. No, decolonially, that we don't accept that. Even Derrida said something about that, but in a different context. This is what I want to say. I mean, with an example. Psychoanalysis, the unconscious, is a psychoanalytic concept. There is no unconscious without psychoanalysis, and there is no psychoanalysis without unconscious. So there is no decoloniality without coloniality, and there is no coloniality without decoloniality. A lot of people talk about the coloniality at large, and that is fine. But in our school of thought, this is the point. And this is so important for the curriculum, for teaching, for the education. And I have to do with the second point, that colonial, the second point that is pedagogy of El Amar, or pedagogy of love. It's so important because the confusion between the represented and the representation and the represented goes together with the belief on truth without parentheses. I have the truth. It's not my truth, the truth. And whoever doesn't accept it is wrong. So when somebody tells you, come on, be real, what does it mean? Think like me. When somebody tells you, come on, be objective, what does it mean? Think like me, right? And that is, the consequence of that is the pedagogy of hate. You began to hate the people who do not think like you, and they are not accepting that you have the truth. And that is happening in Argentina today. That was a kind of increase in the kind of the pedagogy of hate, of la pedagogía de la crueldad, as Rita Segato analyzed it. It's happening in France among the people, but it happened at the international level. The situation in Ukraine is hate, because it was not hate. If the goal was we have to live together, what will be a pedagogy of el amar? I don't say el amor, because el amor has been perverted already by Christianity and liberalism. But el amar means to respect, to listen, to understand that I have my truth and I believe in my truth, but you have yours. And I have to listen to your truth, and we have to live together, understanding that we have different truth, that China have a truth, and the United States have a different truth, and Russia have a truth, and Ukraine have a different truth. So that has to kind of... So the pedagogy of love, of the pedagogy of the Amar, of course, doesn't start in the United Nations. The pedagogy of the Amar has to start at the kind of the early age. At the early age, and the kindergarten and the high school and the university. And that, for me, at the university is the main function of pedagogy in the humanities. I don't believe much in the humanities, but that is the concept we have in the structure of the curriculum, that we have the humanity, the social science, the natural science, the professional school, etc. So the role of the humanity is crucial here. Doesn't matter in what language, it doesn't matter in what discipline. What we have to encourage was another question, a very interesting question to Graciela, was how the question was how you, was not encouraged, but how you make a student to engage in border thinking. That was the question. So and here my question will be, how do you make a student to engage in the pedagogy of love? Because the pedagogy of love is not a question of just the teacher. The pedagogy of love is teacher and students. It's conversation, as Graciela was saying. Because teacher here and the student down there, that is not education, that's schooling. And schooling is necessary in the professional school. You have to school people to be a good engineer, to be a good technician, to be a good doctor or medical doctor or medicine, etc. But the problem now is that the schooling and the school people in the profession believe that the schooling carry a politics and an ethics. And that is what made them believe that in their truth without parentheses. You see it now in medicine. Medicine is no longer a conversation between the doctor and the patient. The doctor has been at school and he knows technology, the technology technology of the body, but I know my body. And my body is not just technology. My body is a lot of things, a lot of emotions, a lot of memories, languages, etc., etc., etc. So the question is how to encourage the students to enter into this conversation in which the humanities have a tremendous role, radical role, because every science is human science. The technology, the science are not made by the robot, are human beings. So, but now the relation is upside down. The humanities is just a kind of thing there to let people do art and thinking and all like that, and things like that. And the serious question are economy and technology and all of that. But you see in what situation the world is. Because science and technology make the people, the technician and scientists, make the people believe that science authorized them to have the truth without parentheses. And that if you occupy a position in the government, you began to believe that you have that superior truth. And if you become a CEO of a bank or the IMF, you began to believe that you have the truth without parentheses. So that is a crucial question of the humanities. And in that crucial question of the humanities has to do also with the question of language. Because the question of languages now, English or Spanish in this case, are imperial language. Right? Spanish is an imperial language. This is a kind of second class imperial language, but it is imperial language. So perhaps we have to pay more attention to indigenous languages in the Americas, in Africa to indigenous, in China to Mandarin, in the Arabic world they are doing it to Arabic, because there is a lot of knowledge in those languages that have been destituted, as Graciela was saying, by English, by French, by German. So to decolonize the English curriculum, we have to, in Argentina, you have to step out of it. You have to step out of it and start from what the English language is destitute, what the English language silence. And so you can go to Spanish, but then you say Spanish is also an imperial language. Okay, so let's go to Aymara, Quechua, or even Mandarin or whatever other languages that have been destituted by, because in those languages, I mean, the Chinese have to speak English to go to the G20, for example. But their memory, their history, their question of gender, their ethnicity is built in Mandarin. English is just a commercial, a technical language. Victor Borga was a very nice, I think it was Dutch or Danish comedian. He used to say, English is not my language. I am just using it. So I think that this kind of distancing, I mean, I use English because, well, I mean, if I speak in Dutch or in Danish, you will not understand me. Now, like it or not, we have to accept that English is the kind of the language that everybody else. I can communicate and have great conversation with my friend in China or in Egypt or in Doha because we speak English. We are using English. So that, I think, is part of the education, of understanding the geopolitics of language, the pro and cons. We cannot deny the use of English, but at the same time, we don't have to celebrate. So another question that relates to the geopolitics of languages and histories and memory, and is related to education, is not just the university, but are the institutes, like l'Alliance Française, the British, I don't remember there is also a kind of in every country there is a kind of British or Italian, or I said French. So each imperial country not only have embassy that kind of promote a conversation like this one, but they have kind of cultural institution that disseminate the language and the culture of their culture. But Argentina doesn't have an Institute of Culture Argentina in the United States. Spain has Instituto Cervantes, but Spain is an imperial country. Bolivia doesn't have a kind of Bolivian institute in Paris, but there is an Alliance Française in La Paz, right? So we have to think about that. That's the kind of the geopolitical language, how English affect us in Argentina, and what happened to Spanish or Latin American Spanish in other countries. So that's one aspect. Now, the second aspect is very interesting because China, at some point about 10 years ago, realized that, well, they knew it, of course, but 10 years ago, they realized that, and also they had the money to create Confucian Institute all over the world. So what happened in the United States and Europe? No. They are trying to infiltrate kind of Chinese ideology into this democratic country, a democratic country that has to kind of suppress the introduction of the Confucian. So you see how, because the Confucian Institute, or whatever they call it, was also taught in Mandarin. So Mandarin were infiltrating the English language. There's a lot of people in China who speak English. But apparently, they are happy with that. The United States and England are happy with that. And the Chinese are happy with that too, because they are using it. They are not losing Mandarin. So the question of language and the power of language and the power differential is to be very aware that in Argentina, English is a tool, is an instrument that we have to use. We don't have to use, but it's there and it's difficult to deny. So we have to use it. But we cannot surrender and forget about our memories, about our Spanish languages in Argentina, in this case, and the Spanish language in Argentina carries the whole weight of the constitution of what we call Argentinian culture, Argentinian identity. I don't think that is an Argentinian identity. I don't think it's any kind of unified identity. But there is people who talk about identity in a given language, and how the high class, the latifundista of the province of Buenos Aires, think Argentinian identity, and how my grandparents who become Argentinian think the Italo-Argentinian identity. It's a different thing, but we are all in this kind of conversation. And what is a culture? A culture is not an essence. A culture is a network of conversations that has been transmitted through generation. And that transmission is memory, is knowledge, is emotion, and is sensibility, is history. History is not the book that kind of make a chronology. History is us. We are history. And we have been made by that history, kind of the history of, in this case, Argentina. Well, let me see how 6:49. Okay, I have still. I want to talk for an hour, and so we have more time for conversation. So this was a huge package related to the question of the dialogue and the concept, geopolitics, ethnicity, history, memory, languages. The second large package related to the first has to do with the colonial wound, healing colonial wounds, and a little bit more about the pedagogy of Amar, pedagogy of love. I already said something, but I will say more. What do we mean, we, the people who follow, in my abstract, I'm sorry, in my abstract I said, we, the follower of Quijano, talk about the colonial wound. I apologize, I didn't mention that the colonial wound come from Gloria Anzaldúa. So in my case, in the case of Maria Lugones, we share that source or that inspiration. At the different moments, but Maria Lugones, Gloria Anzaldúa taught us what the border means, the borderland, the borderline means. And the borderline mean, and the border thinking that the question somebody asked before, the border is not just two sides with the same kind of power. The border is always the power differential. And the power differential is not just, as Anzaldúa said, is a kind of 20,000 miles long line where the first world and the third world frotan and bleed. So the image of bleeding in the border, that's the colonial wound. And why bleeding? Because of power differential. Because the two, when one side of the border is United States and the other side of the border is Mexico. And there is a power differential at every level. Of course, languages, but ethnicity. The Mexican are from the white Anglo. They are brown. They are speaking Spanish. They are mixed with Indians. So they're inferior human beings. So you see the question that how languages, the power differential between languages and ethnicity become entrenched with race and with races. Because races is not, you cannot measure races. You cannot do any kind of analysis. Well, it could be that there are, if you can want to call races, that there are a configuration of bodies in different parts of the world, etc. But the concept of race that is racist is where a hierarchy is established. And that hierarchy is not biological. That hierarchy is cultural. So the appearance of the body, if you are kind of a brown, or you have a long nose, or you have curly hair, those are surface, superficial markers that allows for who have the cultural epistemic power to classify, to establish a hierarchy. And that hierarchy means that there are people inferior to other. And languages, somebody who speaks Arabic will be always, at this point, perceived as an inferior. But somebody who speaks Spanish, and especially Spanish from Latin America, will be the same. There is difference in the United States with the Spanish from Spain. A Spaniard from Spain are European, ethnically European. But a Spanish from Latin American people from speak Latin American Spanish, they are from the South. And the South of Latin America is not the South of Europe. Oh, be careful with the global South. The South of Europe, Spain, Portugal, Italy, is not the same that the South of the America or the South of Africa. Even the North of Africa, which is the South of Europe, right? So be careful with this kind of generalization of a global South. And in the United States, there is a global South. And the global South is seen from the North as inferior. And the global South, we know, is the most conservative part of United States. Right? And all of that has to do with languages, with ethnicity, with memory, with history, and with the colonial wound. How does it work? I said at the beginning that coloniality is, you can understand coloniality conceptually, theoretically. I don't have a definition of coloniality, and I don't want to give a definition. The only definition of coloniality that I provide is something that Graciela already said, that coloniality is the darker side of modernity, that there is no modernity without coloniality. That modernity is the rhetoric of salvation, salvation by conversion, by civilization, progress, modernization, development. But in order to do that, which is half of the story, you need to disqualify, to dispossess, to exploit, to oppress. And one way of oppression, two ways of oppression combined are racism and sexism. What we call, the history of the male oppressing women is very long. It's the moment in which historians are saying now that when emerged the patriarchal culture. Some people are saying 10,000 years before Christ. Archaeological research is telling us that in all the area that is now kind of south, the Balkans, but also Anatolia, Central Asia, 15,000 years ago, before Christ, there were cultures that some people call partnership culture, and Maturana called matristic, not matriarchal, matristic. What distinguishes that culture for living conditions, etc., that's long to explain, but the point is that in those cultures, the generation and the care of life was the main goal. Not to improve, to have more, to dominate. And that was the kind of the culture of love. Culture of love were the kind of the male understood the importance of women in the regeneration of the species. but they didn't take advantage of that and send the women to the kitchen, and then they went to the bank. There was a different articulation of the cooperation between what we call today women, the feminine and the masculine. And that is why, even if we go back to Greece, the Greece of Homer, the Greece of Hesiod, 7, 8, 9 centuries before Plato and Aristotle and all this kind of guy, there was a lot of goddesses or female divinities. And there were male divinities. Why? Well, because of that. Because it was a kind of shared responsibility in the regeneration of life. And so, naturally, you have goddesses and gods in the kind of modern terminology. But you have female and male divinities. That is the most clear example of a culture of partnership, of matristic culture in Maturana. But apparently for, again, changing condition of life, the division of labor between male and female and male, what we call today patriarchal culture, began to emerge. And of course, races doesn't have that long history. There is no races before 1500, or perhaps they say the end of the 15th century. There was difference, of course. There were differences in any kind of civilization: Persian, Chinese, Indian, Incas, Aztec. There were differences. What the Greek called barbarian, the people who didn't speak Greek properly. The now what called Chichimeca, the people of the north that didn't speak Nahuatl properly. There were differences. But what makes that difference racist is when a given civilization or language in this case, have the power to classify. And this classification is related to dispossession of land and exploitation of labor. And that the dispossession and exploitation of the indigenous people and of the African human being, enslaved human being. So races appear as a classification of lesser human in a culture of the Renaissance, in where you have the human, the perfect human of Leonardo da Vinci, and the concept of the humanities. And the humanity is the superiority of those people who define the human and the humanities. But in the 16th century, races and sexes collide. And it's not the same, the treatment that a Spanish male gives to a Spanish female to the treatment that the same Spanish male gives to an Indian female. Or a British in the plantation, how the British in the plantation treat the women, which is always inferior, of course, but how he treats a black woman, enslaved woman, is different. So races and sexes become, as Rigoberta Menchú said, a mental sickness, una enfermedad mental. Una enfermedad mental that makes some people believe in their superiority and convince other people that they're inferior sexually or racially. And that's a colonial wound when people believed. When people believe that they are inferior because of sexual preference or sexual biology, or because they don't speak English or German or French, or because they have a different memory, or they have a different language, etc. That is the colonial wound. So there are physical wounds too, but the colonial wound is basically psychologically. And the question is, how do you heal? Once you know, first you have to know how the coloniality inflicts colonial wounds. Once you know, understand, and sense, feel that you are somehow affected by the colonial wound, because everybody is affected differently. And there's a lot of people who are not affected by the colonial wound because they belong to the group of people who classify and inflict colonial wounds. And that's very interesting, because this in my seminar, generally white people, students, female or male, ask the question. I say, well, I am Anglo-American heterosexual. What do I do? Well, I mean, it's not your fault. First of all, it's not your fault. You didn't elect it to be born like that. But once you are aware, now you have ethical and political responsibility. I cannot tell you what you have to do. Beyond that, you have to kind of be ethical and political responsible. But it's up to you to find out in your context, in your biography, in your family history, etc., how would you relate with people who are wounded by the colonial wound, and work with them. And that is where the kind of the pedagogy of love emerged. When you understand that because of colonial history, you have privilege, and you are now with people who are do not have privilege, but also have been wounded sexually or racially. So that is the moment. And that had to happen in the classroom. Because of, and now it's different, but a few years ago was always a tension in the classroom between blacks and whites and gay and lesbian. And most clearly is that black people couldn't hide that they were black, but gay and lesbian, they could, and they did, but they don't do anymore. And in my class, I always start not just telling them, if you are gay, you are free to express yourself. No, the question is to find the way in the material you work with to make them feel comfortable, feel that they are kind of related to this material that we are. And with the white who do not experience the colonial wound, they have conversation with people who feel the colonial wounds. And now that's the kind of the pedagogy of love is not just the teacher loving the students. The pedagogy of love is how you establish an atmosphere of conversation, and that is education. That is learning from each other. Schooling and technology and engineer, you have to do that. But in the humanities, this is the task we have to do. But we have to do this kind of task for the entire university, not just for the humanities. Not just for the humanists. We have to kind of involve scientists and technicians and politicians and economists to understand that. That is a conversation that is beginning. But I think that since you are into this series of conversation, well, that is something to think about. So the way to decolonize the English curriculum is just to recognize what the English culture and politics and economy is and does. What are we in Argentina? be aware of that. We don't have to insult the United States because they are imperialist, but we have to talk. We have to kind of be diplomatic and kind of pedagogical diplomatic and say, well, hey, you know, I think that this happened, but we cannot accept it anymore. We cannot accept anymore that we are inferior. Now, if you believe that you're inferior, that's your problem, it's not mine. So we have to kind of talk. So I think that the future generation, that the students, these are kind of the reflection that I will invite in the pedagogy of love. And I finish with that. How do you heal colonial wounds? Regaining your dignity. Regaining your pride. You are who you are. You have been classified. You have born in such a family and country, etc., and then you have been classified, or you belong to those who classify. In Argentina, probably there were not too many people of that. I mean, because in Argentina, there are people who classify, yes, of course, national. So there is a hierarchy of national Argentina. But Argentinian in relation to France and the United States are Indians. We are Indians. Yeah? So that is a condition of border dwelling. And that is a condition of border thinking. When you recognize that you are a king in Argentina because you're white and because you are heterosexual, but you are an Indian when you go to France or when you go to the United States. So how you heal the colonial wound is regaining your dignity, but that is not a task that that your ego can do. The ego is the problem of modernity. And you see Trump and you see Bolsonaro. That is the consequence of the ego of modernity. Healing colonial wound is conversation, is being with others, talking with others, educating each other, and helping each other to heal the colonial wound. And those of you who do not suffer the colonial wound, I mean, getting into the conversation, recognizing your privilege and dealing with your privilege, reducing your privilege to their own size, not to give too much, well, not to maintain the privilege, but to kind of reduce the privilege, being who you are. Well, I stop here, and I think we have, I talked 1 hour and 15 minutes. But we have still 30 minutes, 40 minutes for conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Walter. Thank you for this brilliant presentation, really. Yeah, there are many comments and questions and reflections. Yeah.
La figura del poeta, ¿no?
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about La figura del poeta en la lírica de vanguardia. It's a reading that we literary students read like in the first years, and we love it. And here you are talking to us.
Okay. So let's see. There are some comments, probably some questions there. So I encourage people to ask. Probably Walter was mentioning not to surrender, right? To the use of English, right? As an imposition or something that we have to use. Because it's part of our education and even our academic biography. And I mean, since the times we were children, that we were also sent to study at these institutes that he was also mentioning. So the question would be, how do we know? I mean, how not to surrender, right? When we are probably constantly being like bombarded by a cultural industry that makes it difficult, right? Not to be constantly buy into English because it's omniscient. I mean, it's present everywhere, right? It's all present. So whatever we receive from mass media or social networks, these categories are everywhere, and English is the language that they come, that they are written into. So how not to?
Yeah. I will introduce here a new concept that we are in conversation, discussing with Rita Segato. We have different views, but el arraigo. You do not surrender. You cannot be co-opted if you are aware of your arraigo, your grounding. The indigenous people in Canada talk about grounded normativity. That's el arraigo. And grounded normativity by them is the way they kind of do not surrender to French and English of the Canadian states. And they are more bombarded than us. So if you have your arraigo is your body, you feel it. And English or French or whatever is exterior. It's like having a hammer. It's kind of using it when necessary, but do not abandon your arraigo. Be aware constantly of your arraigo. Give you an example that I was born in Corral de Bustos, a small town in the province of Córdoba. From Corral de Bustos, I learned to understand globalization, the history of Argentina, racism, not while I was living there. Later on, when I began to kind of... Now, I left Corral de Bustos when I went to the university in Córdoba, and that was around, 63, 64. I went back while I was at university periodically. Then I went to France and then United States. I came every year. Now my folks pass away, so I may not go back many times there. But it's not that I have to be there to be arraigado, to be grounded. It's that Corral de Bustos is in me, wherever I am. And because I have that arraigo, I can enjoy dwelling in the border and border thinking, because if I write in English, but when I write in English, I write from my arraigo in Argentina or in Corral de Bustos. So the question is to know who you are, how you have been formed, what is kind of ground you. For indigenous people, that is different because their grounding is the memory of their language, of their ancestor, of their practice of living, etc., etc., etc. Our practice of living are mixed because we are los confines de Occidentes, as what is the guy who wrote that book? I mean, we are Western, but not quite. We are in the West, but we are not Western in the sense of the North Atlantic. So all those things we have to think about, because you have to think, because in the history of Argentina, you have to think about our own emotion. How do we feel in relation to our own biography in the context in which our autobiography emerged? Because, I mean, when I was growing up, and then there's a Corral de Bustos, was kind of surrounded by what I was knowing from the radio, from Buenos Aires, Córdoba, Rosario, etc., etc., etc. That shape your sensorium in a way that you cannot quantify. You cannot go to somebody to quantify, or just, I don't know, go to somebody who will quantify the amount of arraigo that you have. That is not like that. So that's the question of no surrender is kind of value being proud of your sensorium. And by sensorium, meaning the way you feel you are. That's my solution. I don't know.
That's great. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Would that have any connection? That's my question with Kush and his idea of categories that we lack, or we lack because we were like devoid of those categories, and this idea of existential address, domicilio existencial, suelo, arraigo as well.
El suelo, that's exactly. El suelo cushiano is el arraigo.
Okay, right. Thank you. Okay. There is a question there. Estela Maris asks, do you see these changes towards pedagogies of loving and decolonization present in course books? I mean, she means probably didactic materials or teaching materials. Does this mean that we should rely on authentic material, for example?
Thank you for that question. I answer the question with two examples. One is the Zapatistas, La Escuelita Zapatistas. The Zapatistas wrote their own books. Not only they wrote their own books, I don't remember how was it, but 3 or 4 years ago, before COVID, they were organizing events around La Escuelita Zapatistas and inviting 2,000 people, more or less, from all over the world. And when the people got there, they were expecting some kind of conference and a big room, etc. No, when they got there, they have about, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 buses. And they kind of put the people in buses and they took it to the different communities. So La Escuelita Zapatista, the Zapatistas were teaching to the people that were invited what the Escuelita Zapatistas is. So that is to think about. We may not be able to do something like that at the university, but is something to keep in mind. The other is that seminar that I have been teaching for 20 years was a seminar that I was asked by the chair to do, and she gave me the title, and the title is Mayas, Incas, and Aztecs: The Cosmology According to the People of the Indigenous People of Latin America, something like that. Well, I said, who do you think will enroll in that seminar? I corrected the question of Latin America and all that, the title, but, well, 3 hours after the opening of registration was full with a kind of waiting list. And it has been like that since. The limit is 18, because you cannot really go through education with more than 18 people. It is possible because Duke is a private university and the parents of the student pay a lot of tuition. But anyhow, I thought that, and it's a tremendous, I mean, it's such a satisfaction for me and the students. I don't use any text. 5% of the text are, or audio, or Vimeo, or movies, are by non-indigenous. all 95% of the material is by indigenous people. From Canada to the Andes and some Mapuche. So I bypassed the textbook. And so I used 4 or 5 non-indigenous. For example, when I when I want them to understand Aztec ancient cosmology, I have to use Leon Portilla, for example, who is a kind of the master in and something also in the Andes. So they understand the basic of ancient cosmology. But the question for me is not just to teach ancient cosmology, but confront the student with what indigenous people are doing today with that cosmology, how they organize their life, their politics, their art, whatever they do. They always kind of began invoking a cosmology that is Maya or Aztec, etc. So the question for me, I can do it also because I am a distinguished professor and nobody can tell me what to do. But the universities are kind of open. Once you have tenure, you have a lot of freedom. So the question is to bypass the textbook. The question is, what do you want a student to think about? Not what to think, but to think about. And you have to find and create the material to carry that kind of goal. So for me, the goal in this seminar is to have them, for them to have direct contact, well, I mean, not personally, with indigenous thinking. And it's through them, that they began to realize, I don't have to tell what the colonial difference is. They discover it. Well, and I said, well, we have the concept of colonial difference. But I tell the colonial difference when they discover it. When they discover the colonial wound, they say, well, we have the colonial wound. We name the colonial wound what's happening to you. So eliminate the textbook and don't start by the concept. Find the way to kind of, and this is the question, how you engage people in border thinking. Lead them to realize that they live in the border. Because I tell you an example. A brilliant student of chemistry, I think, or biology, Chinese parent. He forgot. He didn't give any kind of value to Chinese, but it was through discovering, confronting, seeing the indigenous people, how important for the indigenous people is to revamp their language, that they began to kind of change the perspective and began to value and want to go back to China and just not just to visit family, but to learn more. Another student told me one day, at just half of the seminar, said, Professor Mignolo, you know what? To go from my dorm to the lab, he was also kind of science student, I have to cross Sarah Duke Garden. Sarah Duke Garden is a beautiful, it's a beautiful garden. It's like Palermo, a little bit smaller, but a beautiful garden. And he said, I was crossing the garden with my iPod and listening to music. Now, I just put that in my pocket and I pay attention to the smell, to the light of the sun, to the birds. And why? Because he saw how indigenous people value the relationship with nature. So when they discovered that, then I began to kind of enter the concept, the culture, the different between who invented culture and nature is a cultural concept to separate us from the living, etc., etc. So that's a way you kind of engage in border thinking and the kind of the value of the humanities, and make them realize that the profession that the professional they will be in the future, they have to be a good professional. But being a good professional doesn't mean that you are a good person, that you care for the other, etc. So that is the role of the humanity. And then we can do it with English, we can do it with literature, we can do it with painting, we can do it with whatever, maps, history, whatever kind of put in front of us, or we are prepared to.
Okay, that was great. Great answer. There is a question here, there is a comment here by Daniela Marini. Says, thank you, Walter. I like to think of English as a powerful tool to name power rather than something we surrender to.
Can you say the first?
It says, I like to think of English as a powerful tool to name power rather than something we surrender to.
Of course. That is the point. Don't be... Because if you don't do that, you risk to be converted to Christianity, and you don't want to be converted to Christianity, for example, right? And that is, English now is like Christianity in the 16th century. They want to convert you, but they have a different tactic. They don't go anymore and say, I want to come. No. They put the institute or the cátedras, so you see how great the English culture is. You know what it's doing now in the television? I think I saw it here. That is tremendous. I am looking for the web, the articles on the politics, what is going on in Ukraine and China, etc. And all of a sudden, there is an advertising. Beautiful young women with a U.S. passport. They can get a U.S. passport. Please get. And then what happened it's difficult to get it, but then when you go there, what happened to you? I have to think more about that, but there is that kind of enticement of the image of you can become an American citizen when United States is kind of expelling out of the country a lot of undesirable people. So there you go again, the racism and sexism mix in the kind of the relationship between the state and the public sphere. So yes, do not surrender.
Great. Okay, thank you there. Yes, Daniela continues, saying with the condition of being arraigados, as you said. I mean, linking this that you said before to the comment that she has just made. So do not surrender with the condition of being arraigados, as you said. So clicks together, right?
Exactly. El arraigo, the grounding, is what kind of save you from being converted. But if you want to be converted, that is your option too. Yeah, it's not that you have to not surrender. You can say, I like that. So, but you have to be aware that there are options, and option means ethical and political responsibility. That's all. I am not preaching that you have to be arraigada and not surrender. I'm just telling you the options.
Definitely. Right. Okay. Eliana Pirelon says, create the material in an interdisciplinary way, referring to the way you propose the production of material or how to use it teaching materials the way you did, more kind of inductively, I understand. Create the material in an interdisciplinary way, she says. So like,
right. Yeah, but create material, I don't mean that you have to make it, but there is a lot of material in the web. It's the question that you have to select it. You have to kind of make your own material according to for example, I mean, I teach the cosmology, etc. But for example, I devote several classes to feminismo comunitario with Lorena Cabnal, etc. So that's a tremendous impact in women, of course, because they were just thinking that feminism was just an American white woman thing, and then began to realize. And for male students also, because they are kind of in a culture where kind of the feminism means the woman trying to become equal to men. And feminismo comunitario is not that at all. It's a totally different project. So that's, and there is a lot of material. Education, there's a lot of material education made by the indigenous. There are written, there are videos, there are movies too. So it's the question of spending some time of searching, doing investigation. And that's fantastic because you learn too. You don't have to explain the textbook who wrote somebody else. You become creative, arraigada and creative. And when you are creative, the students enter into that process of creation. If you do a textbook, you are bored and the students are bored and they don't have... The assistant is tremendous, not because they have obligation. The assistant is tremendous because they become interested. And that is also the way I work with them. I can explain that, but that would be too long. Well, I tell you, but because it could be interesting. I only lecture the first two classes. So this is what we are going to do. This is the map. This is the material. This is the kind of. And also to give them time to familiarize, to feel comfortable. Then I divide the class in groups, 4 or 5. So each week I do lecture. I do lecture the topic of the week, but I lecture with conversation. And the second day of the week, they are the kind of the leader of the class. They get together, they prepare, they are the leader of the class, and they ask questions, the other students participate, I listen, and after 10 or 15 minutes, I put things together, I connect, and things continue, the whole hour. So the whole semester is like that. Second, each week, those who do not lead the discussion have to write 2 paragraphs, 300 words more or less, about their thinking. And I said, I don't want to know what you learn. I want to know what you think about what you learn. And I respond to that before the next class. And I don't respond evaluating. This is bad, this is good. I comment. It's a conversation. So there is a midterm, the same. I don't want a paper. I want a reflection. Write a letter, write an essay, write a dialogue, write a memory, write a diary, etc., etc. And the final report, I leave it open to whatever they want to do. That creates a fantastic conversation. And I tell you, the final report, they are great. It's just a pleasure because they put their body and their memory and themselves into reflecting on the material of the class. So everybody enjoy and everybody learn, and that is the kind of the pedagogy of El Amar. and not the evaluar. I should have said that. It's not the pedagogy of the evaluar, which is we inherited from Christianity. I mean, we send the, I mean, we penalize. When you don't penalize somebody is not working properly, you talk to that person. And you say, well, listen, this is not what is going on. How can we? Because if you don't do the work, you put me in a bad position because I have to give you a bad grade, and I don't want to give you a bad grade because that will ruin your kind of grade sheet. And the result is fantastic. Some they say, okay, they would kind of withdraw the seminar. I also give that option. And others said, okay, I do my best. And I recognize the effort and kind of, no, I don't give an A, but I give a kind of a grade that won't hurt the grade sheet. But that, again, that's a pedagogy of love. But you care with this, you care about the student. And you say, oh, you are a bad guy, go to the corner, I gave you a D. Right?
No, that's not education at all.
Right. Okay, so you do away with evaluative components, let's say, that are things that we usually include in the curriculum. So evaluative components are almost excluded, let's say.
I don't understand. Can you?
Yes, the evaluative components in the curriculum, that is the way you test students, exams, you know, the bunch of things that we use for evaluation practices. How do you manage that? They are not there. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, I tell the first day. I mean, the registrar office will ask me to pass the grade. I have to give you a grade. But I don't want you to work for the grade. If you just do the thing that you have to do, you don't have to excel. If you do the thing you have to do, you will get a good grade. And in general, I gave A minus, and 1 or 2 A pluses. Very rarely a B or B plus. If at midterm somebody is not working properly again, I said, I mean, I talked to that person, I allow that person to rewrite because you didn't work very hard here, or you didn't pay attention to that, and so why don't you rewrite? So the question is that I have to evaluate, but evaluation is based on the engagement of the student, not on their intelligence, on the engagement with the material and the conversation with each other. Unfortunately, we have to grade, but I'm trying to kind of overpass the traditional given point. It's always kind of conversation.
Fantastic. That was a great answer.
That's what I do.
Yeah, you don't flunk students. I mean, for what you say, there is no...
No, I don't flunk.
You don't flunk. There's no fail.
I don't flunk. So a midterm is there is things are going really bad, withdraw. Drop the course, and so everybody's happy. Because it's also the decision, I don't force them to drop. Mm-hmm. Have a conversation, and they realize that, well, I shouldn't have enrolled in this seminar because this year I already taken 4 or 5, and that is too much. And of course, they have other preference, and that's fine.
That's fine. Yeah, and that is ethic and political responsibility, as you said as well.
Yeah, you make them exactly. you may take responsibility, and that the pedagogy of love is the interrelation with the faculty or the professor or the teacher and the students.
Great. Okay. Probably we should be closing.
Yeah, I think we'll be perfect.
Yeah. Okay. There are many comments, and there are many people saying hello and thanking a lot for your fantastic talk, this conversation. Yes, even if it's at a certain distance, it's still the conversation that we wanted to set up here. Okay, so
thank you for the love and the generosity too. I mean, to explain your class, the way you teach. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I mean, generosity. That's it. I like that. But okay, it's not a secret.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of. I mean, let me tell you that I really enjoy every semester the way that things work out. So again, there is no dropping people. There are no hard feelings. There is no penalizing. And the students kind of leave the seminar so happy. They send me notes and of what they have learned, how they thought about themselves, how they reflect on their profession, etc., etc. And that, for me, is, I mean, what else?
Yeah.
As a teacher.
Yeah, that's accomplished, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Right.
Okay, well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Graciela. Thank you, Walter, again.
Okay, bye-bye,
Okay.
Anna.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.